So just hand it to John right after.
Good. 9:59, 5:50. Think of the time.
Oh.
Good evening. Hi, good evening. Welcome back. Welcome back from summer now into fall. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inform. My name is Rupert. I'm filling in for Nancy this evening, who is not feeling quite well, but unfortunately, she's not here tonight. She would be because of our guest tonight. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Tonight, John Patkau. I guess without further ado, I'm going to let him just go right into it. You know him, John Patkau.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to give a talk tonight, which is actually a continuation of what I gave at the Polygon Gallery during the summer. So I'm assuming that not everybody here had a chance to see that, and so I'm going to give a brief recap. That's what it, I gotta do this. There we go. I'm gonna do a brief recap of that earlier lecture, which will hopefully be very quick, and then we'll move into new material, which I'll be presenting for the first time. So, I'm going to go back. Let me get organized. So, morphological and relational operations. Okay, so that is the basic taxonomy that we will ultimately see evolve through a series of projects as they develop and as we sort of invent ways of making different things. And by a morphological operation, I mean something where you deform an object. And a relational operation is something where you form an object by assembly that has a relationship to the forms that might be morphological, but they can't be morphological because of a certain issue in architecture, for example, like size. You just can't get stuff that big. And if you want to make it that big, you have to find another way than just manipulating material. So you'll see that as it unfolds. And this whole series of projects, which has now been running for 15 years as a research activity within our office, started with an invitation from Winnipeg, where Pat and I grew up and went to school, to do an installation which was at the time a new idea in Winnipeg, which were temporary shelters that would be on the frozen river to protect skaters to get out of the wind. And so we were invited in the second year of this to do an installation. And so we jumped at the chance because we had been looking at various ways of sort of moving out of the conventional practices that we had within the office at the time. And so these are Pat's little models, but they demonstrate the principle that we settled on right at the outset. And if you look on your right-hand side, what you see there is a small piece of plastic which is being deformed by a rubber band. So the plastic is a flat sheet. You put the rubber band around it and it curves. Because it curves, it can stand and it creates a space. So what's happened is a force has been applied to the object, which has deformed the object and created both a space and a structure. And that is a morphological operation. And so in the Winnipeg skating shelters, for example, we began by studying possibilities using wood veneer. And one of the things we imagined is that we would immediately transform that at a large scale into plywood. And we attempted that, and it failed because there's a big difference between wood veneer and plywood. Wood veneer is an anisotropic material, which is to say it's stronger in one direction and more flexible in the other direction, whereas plywood is designed specifically not to do that. The veneers are in opposing directions, and so it's equally stiff in all directions. And so figuring out how to go from wood veneer at a small scale to plywood at a large scale that could be inhabited, we searched and we found a material, and this material is called bendy ply. And bendy ply is a very specific kind of plywood which has a heavy center ply and two light exterior plies that are going in the opposite direction as plywood does. But because of that, it has quite a bit of strength in one axis and quite a bit of flexibility in the other. And we were able to use bendy ply to create these forms which we made at full scale. We designed the project in our shop at full size because it was impossible to think about it in a scale model. These things were very spatial, very sculptural, and they needed to be sorted out at full size. And so we did that. We took them apart. We measured them and made patterns just like you would if you were making a shirt. We shipped those patterns to Winnipeg, where they built 6 of them and put them out on the river, and they were a great success. This photograph was taken at 30 below zero, which is to say not as cold as this one, which later in the day was 40 below zero. So it's a different place. But the interesting thing is that the shapes that we developed were really just taken out of the material. I mean, in a sense, it's like that old idea that Michelangelo carved. He removed the stone to reveal the object that was always there. Well, that's not the same thing, but it's sort of the same thing. While we were doing that, I was teaching a class of architecture students in New Haven, and the project that I assigned to them was to do a workshop and museum for the Eli Whitney Foundation, which is the Whitney Museum and all the Whitney stuff you see. That was Eli Whitney, who was a great American inventor. And we went to the existing facility that they had, and the director said to me, you should see this video. It's a video about origami. And I thought to myself, but this is very curious. Why would he, out of the blue, suggest that I would be interested in seeing this thing on origami? And it was fabulous. It's called Between the Folds. I recommend it to anybody who has a chance to see it, because it shows how sophisticated origami is, and it's highly mathematical. To me, it was just a bunch of folds that made an elephant. And so Paul Jackson, who was a professor of origami, I didn't know they existed, but he was a professor of origami, and he was challenged by one of his students, and he was in the video, to make origami with one fold. And he said, well, you can't do that because origami has many folds. The more folds, the better. And they said, no, I want to see if you can do origami with one fold. So this is what he did. He took a sheet of paper, and he folded it in the middle, and then he broke the fold, and it stood up and became this beautiful object on the right-hand side. Well, I said, this is interesting. I'm going to try and do this in architecture. I want to do it as big as this room and in steel. And so I made a little one. I got a sheet of galvanized sheet metal, and I made a tiny little one. I scored it and folded it and forced it into that. And I took it to all the steel shops, and I said, can you make this for me only 20 times as big? And they said, absolutely. What we'll do is we'll cut these pieces, and we'll put them in the roller, and then we'll weld them all together. And I said, that's exactly what I don't want you to do. I want the natural forces of the folding to cause the curves to spring. And so we developed through the summer of one year 6 machines, starting with the top one and ending with the bottom one. And these machines are special press brakes, which have a separate brake in the middle. And so here it is. And what we're doing is we have a 12 by 5 sheet of stainless steel, and we put it into our brake, and we're tightening the screws to cause the steel to fold on a diagonal line. And at the same time, we have a break in the, a separation of the break into two pieces. And so we're lifting the whole piece up with an engine hoist to get this form. And so this form is a very interesting form because it is made, it's something that is conceptually not possible because you're making a fold and then you're breaking the fold. And once you've made the fold is the strongest thing you can imagine. It's really, really tough. And so by doing it incrementally simultaneously, we were able to do that. And so the notion here is another interesting concept. This is an example of both plastic and elastic deformation. The plastic deformation is where you fold it, because that's not coming back. That's a permanent thing. The curves are elastic. If I cut out that fold, they would fall into a flat sheet again. Those curving shapes are completely dependent on the fold and the break in the fold to have that form. So I thought that was interesting, and that was the next step in this process. And at that moment, we got a phone call from Comme des Garçons. And they said, we're developing a new shop in Ginza, and we would like something like your skating shelters for the shop so that one could be a display, the other could be a change room or something like that. Except it has to be non-combustible because our fire protection requirements in Tokyo are very strict. And so we thought, well, great, we know how to work with stainless steel. And so we began, and this is another little interesting lesson. These are tiny little models which we made using plastic sheet. And we sprayed it silver so that it looked like stainless steel. But this is just plastic. And what we came to understand fairly quickly was that plastic sheet and stainless steel sheet behave remarkably similarly. When you do something to the plastic sheet, it's similar to what you do to the stainless steel sheet at scale. So we made these things, and we took them apart, and we just scaled them up, and then we built these things. And these things are very large, two of them. They have doors on them, and they have a light inside, and they are stainless steel sheets which have been put together in a different way than the skating shelters, because the skating shelters were made by lapping pieces of wood, whereas here, because we had to take it apart and assemble it again when it got to Tokyo, we had to have connections which were more robust than that, and so we folded those connections. And when you fold something, it has to be a straight line. It's very hard. There are new digital equipment that can make curved folds, but typically they're straight folds. And so we had to develop these forms using straight folds. This is the translucent base, which has a light underneath it, which illuminates the interior of this thing. And so here it is, and here's the next principle which will inform all the work going forward. And that's the principle of the rule line. How do you break a curving shape like this in a way that you can bolt it together and take it apart? You really need, at least with our crude technology, it's not necessary, but with our crude technology, we needed a straight line. And how do you find a straight line on a doubly curving surface? Well, we got lucky and we found one. And we used that to be the joint where we cut it, and we're able to take it apart and assemble it. And that rule line got me to thinking. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, it's very interesting. We have this doubly curved surface that has one line that's a straight line. And architecture tends to be all straight lines, tends to be. The space we're in, it's all straight lines. And so how do you begin to develop a more lyrical, curvilinear architecture utilizing the conventional materials and techniques that are available to architecture? And the rule line was the idea. The rule line is basically this notion that if the upper drawing shows a piece of stainless steel that you twist to get a beautiful curving form, the bottom is a row of pieces of wood which are just rotated relative to each other to create exactly the same form. And so on that basis, with the rule lines, which those pieces of wood represent, there's no size limit. You can make it as big as you want. And so that's what we did. In this, the idea was this sort of a thought exercise. We're going to make retaining walls which cut through a mound in the landscape so that you can walk down the space between the two. And what we would do is we would make the rule lines a big, generous, sweeping curve at the top. That's that line right there. This is one big scale line. And then at the bottom, we would undulate the lines so that we would get the robustness of the folding to resist the lateral pressure of the soil on both sides. So it's a natural way to thicken the material without literally thickening the material to resist the greater forces at the bottom. And so here's the idea. You build these frames, you put some plywood tracks on them, you lay 2x6s on both sides, you shotcrete them, then you remove all the wood, and you get these cavernous curvilinear spaces which descend through the topography with the remaining concrete that has been revealed when you take the wood away. So that opened the door for the different line of investigation. All the projects on the top of the sheet are projects which are morphological operations where we actually apply a force to a thing and deform it and then create something, which is those projects above. The projects on the lower part are relational operations where you take the concept of the deformation, not the reality of it, not the literalness of it, and create forms that mimic that, but at an architectural scale. And so we were very fortunate. There was an international competition. It was an ideas competition for a library in Korea. And we decided that that would be a really good opportunity for us to apply the idea of the rule line to try and develop a form that we thought would be lyrical and spatially sort of engaging using just straight pieces of material. And so here's the concept. You take pieces of wood, and these were timbers. They were 4 inches by 12 inches, and they were 14 feet long. And every time we had a joint, we made a patch, and then we had an unbroken piece next to it, which had a joint on the next two, so that we developed what's called a reciprocal structure. It's reciprocal in the sense that there is no piece that spans the entire span, but the small pieces are connected one to the other in such a way that they act in unison. They become a shell. And so this principle gives us the possibility of making a form, a large form like this, which mimics the formal characteristics of some of the steel folding that we were doing. And so this is a model. This is a big model. It's maybe 8 feet by 6 feet. It's in our office. It's a model building tour de force, I gotta say. And so what you see here are all these little pieces of wood. They go from here to there that are stitched together, and they're all staggered, and they're all attached to one another, and they're all twisted in relationship to each other to create these forms. And the interesting thing is, even the windows and doors and things like that, we just angled these differently to create gaps that you were able to go through, so that the entire building was conditioned by the logic of this one idea of these adjusted relationship of wood members. And it's really interesting because to understand that it's a rule line, so this is a cross section through this form. And you notice that there is no curves. It's totally straight, because all of the members are on that axis are straight, but they're all adjusted relative to each other. So in the perpendicular axis, you get all these billowing, curving forms. And so the net result is you get these kinds of spaces using conventional lumber that you can buy out of any lumber yard in Vancouver. Okay, so the next and last opportunity that occurred prior to all the new work I'm going to show you was an ashram in Kootenay Bay in southeastern BC. And they had had a temple which had burned down, and they had an existing foundation and it was octagonal in plan, and they asked us to design a replacement temple for them. And so we took advantage of that to go further with the notion of the rule line. So this is the reflected ceiling plan looking up into the building, and this is what the idea is. There is a basic glulam beam which has a layer added to it to make the inside shape and the outside shape different, and I'll explain why that's important in a second. And then looking at it from a different point of view, this is the section through that same structure. And so what we're really doing is we are taking 8 of these guys and we're arraying them with members that sit on these arches. And the arches, they're connected to the bottom of the arch on one side and the top on the other. So the bottom is a curve, simple curve, and the top is a complex curve. So by the time you're done, they end up creating very complex curvilinear petals, but very high tech. This project is in a net zero community. It has, the glazing is triple glazed, the insulation standards are very high. It's extremely sophisticated, and by the way, it's made by a Nelson, BC firm called Spearhead, which is one of the most advanced digital fabricators in architecture in North America. It's really a remarkable place in a strange town of Nelson. So this is their model of what one of the 8 petals would be, and this is one of the pieces, and this is them making that piece. And then this is stacking up all the pieces that they need, and we're coating them with the membrane that will keep them waterproof, and then bringing them on site, taking all these pieces and installing them until you get this. Okay, so tonight's lecture is called Maneuvers and Manipulations. And maneuvers and manipulations are the ways in which we have taken the knowledge we've gained from doing these experiments and sort of tried to use that knowledge to enrich the projects that we do. And we've done many projects which are not included in this show because they don't conform to that objective, but we're working at it. And so the first project is a chair, and this is called the twist chair, and it's manufactured by Camper in Toronto. And the idea of this twist chair is very strongly related to, guess what, the skating shelters. And the notion is that you get, this is not Bendiply, this is a different material. This is, and this is what you do. You twist it. So you take a sheet of plywood, and you don't form it like all the formed plywood chairs that you see. This is something where you just twist it, and in twisting it, it becomes conical in form and becomes actually a very comfortable chair. And so here is the result of that from different points of view. And then this is a teaser. How do you make this connection? How do you connect the stainless steel legs to this thin plywood shell? And I'm not telling, it's a magic trick. You have to buy one and take it apart. Okay, so other things that we have done, this is a table. So we're doing a lot of furniture. We'll move into some lighting. We'll look at some buildings. It'll move all over the map. So this table is called the Maitake table. And this is in a house that Pat and I built for ourselves on Bowen Island. And Pat said, we've got to get one of those big stumps. You know, one of those big stumps would be a fabulous coffee table. And I said, oh, you can't do that. It's too kitsch. You can't do the big stump. But I'll do something. And so I developed this modular table. And so the notion is that there are 4 different sizes of this singular shape and 3 different legs that you can put them on, so they can be at different heights, and you can put them together in more ways than I can count. And so, and here are big ones and little ones, and they're attached with brackets underneath. And this is a video that just sort of goes through the innumerable number of forms that you can develop. And again, this is another one of the important principles that we're using as a result of all these experiments, which is aggregation, the accumulation of things and the assembly of things to make variety which simply out of the way in which they're organized together. Stop. Okay. All right, and then this is one in a house that I'm just about to show you. So this is a house, so it's much, much bigger now. Not furniture and not the pavilions that we were doing, but a house. And the house is located in Victoria, and it's on a fairly large lot across the street from, ultimately from Cadborough Bay, which is a really nice part of Victoria. And the house is for a retired couple who had quite a few kids and grandkids, and so they wanted both a house that they could live in and age in place, so it was a single-story house, a large footprint, but it also had to have generosity, because there might be 20 people in their family over for Thanksgiving, something like that. And so the plan is this, but the concept is that what they were looking for was a house that they came from Quebec, and Ottawa area, and they wanted to take advantage of Victoria's climate, which allowed them to engage in beautiful summers, falls, springs, even winters. So the idea that we proposed was that we would use a grape arbor as the idea for what the house would be, and the whole house would become grape arbor-like. And we showed them this project, which is a house we did on Salt Spring Island, where we enclosed the interior of the house in translucent plastic. So all the white that you see that's not drywall, that's translucent plastic. And there are 40 skylights on the roof that don't come through into the interior. They simply illuminate the plastic so that you get daylight into the interior, and the lighting is up there as well, and it mimics the pattern of light underneath the fir trees outside. And so the idea of bringing light into the interiors in a way that had the quality of being outside was the objective. And so we went back to a project which you may know, which is the O'Day Museum, and how we used wood lattices there, and the idea from the library in Korea. And we began to play with it, and we developed a roof system which had strips of skylights running across it, and a folded wood trellis basically below it. And that trellis had the light shining through it, and created effects similar to what you would feel underneath the grape arbor. And so here is the cross section of the house, and you can see that in this one there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strips of skylight running across, and then they filter their way down through a very deep roof assembly through this folded wood lattice. And so this is what the interior of the house has as a common element. It goes through the entire house. Here we are looking from the outdoor swimming pool on one side of the house through to a dining terrace on the other side of the house, with these folded wood forms running all the way through, with the skylight coming through and illuminating the interior. And it goes from, as I say, the pool on one side of the house through the living room, dining room, to the terrace outside, in the master bedroom. It's everywhere. It's in the kitchen. You can't get rid of it. And this is an example of the effects that it creates as the day progresses. Okay, there's some of these. Right over there, there's a couple of them. These are called minima light forms, and they're a secret formula. I can't tell you what it is, but basically it is based on the notion that we have shapes that are made out of discs of plastic, and we stretch material between them, and it's not too dissimilar from an earlier project where we used pantyhose as the basis of a lighting fixture. And we developed many, many different kinds of forms. And so the elastic fabric took on these shapes. What we're working with is not an elastic fabric. It's a permanently deformable material that we deform, and we place a composite material on top of that to create the glowing forms. So these forms, this is minima light form 1, which is a floor light. This is minima light form 1 pendant, which is upstairs by the bar. This is the biggest one, and the one upstairs is the smallest one. And here you see them all. And then we have minima light form 2 pendant, which is also in the shop here today. And we have minima light form 3, which is a table light. And even a pendant, as you can see over here. Okay, back to architecture. So it's sort of a crazy sort of ping-ponging of scales. And so this is a project, is a small building for the BD Living, which is a developer of condominiums. And BD Living are developing what's called Fraser Mills, which is a very large tract of land in Coquitlam, which will ultimately have 5,500 homes in the sky. And so they commissioned us to design a pavilion where they could, over the years it would take to develop this project, which is decades, that they could have little show suites inside. And so we developed this form, and the notion is really very simple. The idea is that you take glulam beams and you cause them to swell, and that's it. That's all that it takes. These are this is combination both of the ruled surface and the aggregation. You can see all that part of what makes this successful is the density of these members. So here they come. And that's the project, and you can see how much the roof swells up and how the canopy also swells in a different direction. It gives it a delicate, almost, I think of this as sort of, to me, a little Japanese sense to it. I don't know why, but. And then the interiors are the wood shell, and this is, by the way, this is our furniture as well. This is our Joey stool, and some more of our stuff. And then Ottawa, we entered a competition. It was a very long process, very bureaucratic, for the design of Kawiki Point, which was Nepean Point at the time. It's been renamed as part of a decolonizing strategy, and I think that the design also embodies, I think, a very successful decolonizing strategy. But I don't think it's the subject of what I'm talking about tonight, but in a different context, it'd be worth discussing. But what I want to talk about is simply the object that we made. And so you can see that you have the National Gallery of Canada, you have the Parliament of Canada, and the Canadian Museum of History, and we're sort of in the middle of that triangle with our piece of ground. And we did this together with a Toronto landscape firm called Janet Rosenberg Studio. And as I say, I can't remember when we did it. It must have been it was pre-COVID, and it just got finished this year. And so this is the plan, and This is a National Gallery just off the edge here, and the river is toward the left. And the piece of land, the idea is really very simple. We would make a pathway that would go around the perimeter, and that pathway would ultimately be continuous with the pathway that they were trying to create all along the river, very extensive. And then we would also have a pathway that would occupy the interior of the park, and where the interior pathway and the exterior pathway coincide, we created a viewing platform, which we called Whispering Point, and I'll explain why whispering in a moment. And so this is that pavilion, and this is looking at it from above, where it is the point to be able to see as the distant view. But there is also a place below, and this drawing shows a wood screen within that place below. And this wood screen has the characteristics of many of the projects which we previously showed. It has a large-scale sweep at the top and an undulating character at the bottom. The purpose of that is to give the upper portion a large scale and the lower area a more intimate scale. Also, there was the idea at the time, which hasn't been executed, but we're still hopeful. So you can see it's like the Rift project in the sense that it's big scale on the top and small scale on the bottom. But the notion was that we would create what was a piece of art that would be sound. It would be whispering, that you would sit and you would be able to sit in sort of alcoves because of the undulations, and there would be voices. We were very taken by some of Janet, tell me who, Cardiff, Janet Cardiff, yeah, by her work. But it could be, it didn't need to be her, but the idea of being able to be sitting there and then have these voices slowly. So the notion was that we would create this void, this cavity, into which technology could be placed to give these whispers. And people would be sitting, and then suddenly the piece would start talking to you. And so, again, Spearhead in Nelson made all of the pieces, and it goes together like that. And so you have the upper level, which has the great views, and you have the lower level, which is more intimate and has these places for people to sit quietly. And you can even see in this image how these undulations at the bottom create very soft and sort of, they're hard architecture, but they're comfy in feeling. And so the idea would be that the sound would be coming randomly from behind this structure. And these are the aggregation of these curvilinear forms. Okay, last project tonight. This is a sculpture competition that I entered with a former employee of mine, Pete Wenger, and together we proposed this project called Stillness, and we won, and it's actually being fabricated right now. We've gotten through a year of bureaucratic approvals at Surrey, and so this is at the Cloverdale Sport and Ice Center, and it's big sheets of ice. And so our inspiration came from the ice, the idea that you have this flat sheet, this abstract flat sheet, which you apply forces, which are typically curved lines, to move your body through space. And so you move your body through space, it becomes action, but it also has moments of stillness. And sculpture can move, but this one doesn't. It captures the stillness part of that experience. And so this is the piece. It's made very much like the one fold that I showed you earlier, this piece, because it's got a fold and a curve, and so does this. What we did here was we made two folds that were not a continuation of one another and connected them with an arc, a cut. And so we could fold these guys and make very interesting forms. And I'm going to show you, this is a small piece of steel, which is actually being folded right now as the piece would be. And so you can see how now we're talking about we're talking about 15 feet squares of steel that are 3/8 of an inch thick. So we're not actually folding them, but conceptually we're folding them. And so, and again, the question of aggregation comes into it, and how when you juxtapose them one to the other, you get very interesting formal relationships. In this case, our budget allowed us to build 2, and so and this was the site that was given to us, these planters, and so this is what we proposed, and this is a video of what it would be like. Subsequent to this, we've actually moved them closer together. I think the space between them is too big. They're not engaging with each other enough, but you get a sense of what they're like. Thank you. Yep.
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
The comment is, thank you very much for bringing sculptures and art into architecture as a function. Thank you. Second question is, how can I or we get access to those pictures?
Oh, well, you can just email me, and I can provide them for you. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Happy to take questions if you have them. Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you.
The picture you did on the Winnipeg on the river, the
Yep.
lighting that you did at the top of it, and the top of those structures there, how did you do that with being on the river, like on the water?
Oh, those are lanterns.
They're just lanterns?
They're just lanterns, yeah. Yep. Yes.
I just want to know, like, acoustically, those forms, I mean, do you think of it, like, in terms of how sound and that, with these different forms? Because I think sound is, very shaped, it's just like form.
Mhm.
So I didn't know, do you take that into consideration too?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm reading a book right now by an author by the name of Paul Young. It's a new book on how creatures sense, and it's unbelievable. I forget what it's called. My sister gave it to me for my birthday, but it's fabulous because it goes into echolocation and magnetism, how some creatures feel magnetic fields, and etc. It's just an unbelievably interesting thing, and it makes me feel bad that I haven't been thinking about sound more, because I think your question is really an interesting one. How could these forms relate to sound, and become amplified or become amplifiers as a consequence of that? I think that's tremendously interesting. I'm really, like, for example, the Kaweki Point project, Whispering Point, I really hope we can convince the National Capital Commission to install the sound piece, because I think it will transform it into something much more. But
Because your form is so beautiful.
yeah, No, I totally think that's right, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm just curious about structure and forces. And I'm just wondering, I can see in the presentations center there is a consideration of beams and stuff to kind of support the curvilinear group. But I didn't really see that in like the shelters, and like I just wonder how you work with, there's a lot of energy or unresolved forces in these forms, and how do you consider that as part of the design?
Well, I mean, that's correct. For example, the skating shelters, the plywood is held by force into that curvilinear shape. And that is what gives it the structure and the space. And our mock-up is hanging on the wall of my studio as flat sheets, because we just unbolted it and it went flat. And so there's a lot of potential energy that's being stored when you make these deformations. And if they remain elastic, then they will spring back. If they become plastic, which is to say you've gone past the yield point of the material, then they will remain permanent and the energy is dissipated. And so those are all very interesting things, and definitely you have to think about the forms and structure. The structure is not after the fact. The structure is coincident with making the form, and the form is an inherently structural form. And that's the whole point. Yep.
I have a final question. How do structural engineers react when you take this?
Well, we work with very good structural engineers, and we have great structural engineers in Vancouver, as you know, and so the IDEA competition for Korea, Jerry Epp was our consultant on that, and his son Lucas Epp was the engineer for the pavilion we did for BD Living, and we've worked with many engineers like that, the temple in Kootenay Bay was Eric Karsh. And so there's a great diversity of really talented engineers who are capable of thinking outside of the box, who can deal with these more sophisticated forms. And they've been an important part of the development of the ideas, certainly. Yep.
In Patkau's earlier work, there was kind of reference to I don't know if it was the building, but sort of creating this landscape viewing device, or I forget what the exact
Yep.
term you used was, but there's this kind of duality in the work between site-responsive work and then this kind of siteless exploration of form, right,
Yeah.
in an abstract. And so I'm just curious if you can speak a little bit about how you dance between those two.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's absolutely true. All of our early work was very site-specific and very concerned with the relationship of the interior and the continuity into the landscape. And certainly things that you do in furniture are not site-specific, and so they don't address those issues. And I think that's a loss, but at the same time they gain some freedom by being out of context. And so that's the sort of the dance you now do. We used to always be driven by context, and now in these separate projects, the furniture, the sculpture, and things like that, it tends to be more focusing on the object and the energy that it sort of puts out, as opposed to the collecting of energy from the context. It's interesting. But you're right. It's a real difference.
In reference to morphology
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
Yep.
And I see sort of a range in how you implement it in your projects. I'm just wondering how you play with that balance. Kueki Point, I'm sure it didn't come just from the curves, but it maybe.
No, that's right. In fact, that connection was afterward, right? Suddenly I saw that the form of Quickie Point, this wood screen, had very many similarities to the Rift design. It never occurred to us when we were doing it. In fact, what I was thinking about was mushrooms. The Quickie Point is sort of mushrooms. But I guess your mind is doing stuff, and you do develop a proclivity for certain kinds of forms, certain kinds of gestures over a long career, and so that informs what you do, and you begin to sort of not repeat yourself, but resemble yourself, and that can be a problem too.
What about the cost? Like some of those
Yeah, well, the cost in time and energy on the part of our team is the biggest cost. I mean, it takes a lot of work to develop these things, years. And so so for me, how do you support that? Well, it's difficult, and you do it on a provisional and ad hoc basis as what you can afford. If you have the ability to both have the time, and fortunately we've had lots of time because we have had many not very busy periods, and so you can apply those periods to things like this, but also the architectural projects have subsidized all this work, and that's just, and it's not nothing.
like that library in Korea.
Yeah,
Of course, in Asia, you might be able to, the cost is not as, everything isn't as expensive. I wonder if it's easier to do your forms there.
I'm not so sure about that. It depends on who you. I think that that we have a couple of fabricators now in British Columbia, the Spearhead Company in Nelson, and also a company called Structurecraft in Abbotsford, who are have very sophisticated technology, computerized fabrication, and big plants, major investments in sort of sophisticated fabrication. And I think that that's the key. It's not so much the problem of cost. The problem of cost diminishes when you have the techniques and the knowledge to actually execute them.
Well, I hope it keeps here.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think that the prefabricated elements that you mentioned in Nelson are good for single families, or is it just for mass production?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I'm waiting for somebody who wants a house that is doing that. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, how does weather affect the design and the maintenance and the durability of the structures that you create? For example, in Winnipeg and Ottawa, they can be quite windy and snowy.
Yeah. Well, the Winnipeg one is designed to be a temporary structure on a frozen river for a limited period of time, and then it's destroyed, and something else is done the following year. So its durability is not an issue because it's basically not there for very long. The one in Ottawa is another matter, and so we have a big roof that covers it, and it's up off the ground, and there's a concrete edge that keeps it back from the pavement. And so our hope is that, and the wood has been treated, et cetera, but our hope. I guess it's improper to, as an architect, to ever say hope, because it shouldn't be a guessing game. Your liability insurer would be very unhappy if it was a guessing game. But there are some elements of risk, but to me, if the risk is simple weathering of the material, that's part of the nature of the material, and that's not a problem. So by and large, we're very experienced architects. We've been doing this for 40-some years, and so the technical issues are well understood. We're very competent in doing large buildings which have very complicated systems within them, and so we can do these things by and large with a great deal of confidence by virtue of that broad experience that we have. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Sorry, I have one more question. Yeah. Sorry, that didn't really. Yes. So, this is a linear house. And there's no idea that it's plastic, translucent plastic on the inside. My first thought was, like, do they have a problem with, like, the silhouettes of dead bugs? Can the panels be, like, taken out and put back on these?
They are just screwed on, so you can unscrew them, but I don't think that's a problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you very much.
It takes me a few times. so thrilled to know. We'll see you soon. We have to run off. You're not going to make a great story. It's a great story. See you soon.
Like,